we are going to talk about tonight is, first of all, I want to point out to you what are the potential things that are going to increase or decrease your possibility of passing that test. And then secondly, what to do if you fail a test. So our objective this evening is just to talk around, so what are those things that you can do and how to gauge your ability to be able to pass a test. There are certain things you can do which will create a situation where you know you have a really good chance at passing that test. Or there are certain things you might do which jeopardize that potential of you being able to pass that test the first time. And honestly, in the end, you want to try and get through that test the first time, because there are so many additional costs and aggravations around the fact that if you don't get through that test the first time. So here we are, BDS London has become LDriv, and tonight we are going to talk about how to prevent this fail and also what to do if you do fail. Okay, what happens when you fail? Guys, I had this so many times, and somebody says to me, they go into the driving test, they are really well prepared, they do really well, but their nerves gets to them and they get really nervous and they make one mistake and they fail. And then they say, oh, I've wasted my time, I've wasted my money, I'm not going to do this again. It is a journey, people. It is just a journey. That's all it is, like anything else. First of all, the first thing you have to do is to decide you are going to do this and you are going to get your driving license. The second thing you have to do is just see it as a journey. You want to do this journey the best possible way you can, the shortest road, the cheapest you can, and at the end of the day, you want to get to the end and get your driving license. And unfortunately, the way things are structured at the moment, and because there is no respect, and I do mean that with tongue-in-cheek, there's no respect for what the instructors tell you. And then people go and fail their driving test because they haven't listened to what an instructor has said to them. Because he's just part of what has to get you there, and you don't want to pay him extra money. So guys, please, we will look at that as well. So don't think of it as anything else than a journey, okay? What you need to do is always take stock. You have to actually take stock before you do the exam, and in time before you do the exam. And then if you have failed the exam, you have to take stock. And if you've passed the exam, you still have to take stock, because now you're going to be looking at what type of car do I want to get, who can help me get the right car, and various other things. And then insurance as well. And then passing the first time is not difficult and is not that expensive. I promise you, the cheapest thing you can do is pass the driving test the first time. So why do I say that's the cheapest? Let me give it to you. Just think of this for 1 minute, okay? Your journey ends when let's say your learning to drive journey or your preparation journey up to the driving test ends on the day you pass. Now, everything you do to the day you pass is going to be part of that journey. But you can't get to that driving license without going through that journey, okay? And that's what you've got to understand. Now, why is that the cheapest? Well, the next time you have to deal with that driving test, it's going to cost you more, and I can say it to you irrevocably because I've experienced this with many students. It's going to cost you more, that second test, than the extra lessons you might have had to take to be more ready to pass that driving test. And sometimes, and I've done this so many times, and then somebody that within 4 hours of being ready to pass that driving test, and then they don't want to pay for those 4 hours because they've decided they are ready to pass that driving test. Then they go away and they failed, and then they say, no, I can't afford it anymore, I'm ready, I can do this. And they go and do the test, and when you do the test, the pressure on you is higher than when you're driving with your driving instructor. And then those 4 hours would have made the difference to get you ready for your test. Now you failed the driving test, now you're stuck with 8 hours, 3-month waiting time, trying to find a test, and all the other costs that go with that. And then in the end, that 4 hours would have been the cheapest possible expense you have just thrown out the door. I don't know, you're thinking that you are ready when you are actually not ready. And let's try and see how we can mitigate that. Now, what you can see on the screen at the moment, because we don't know what the DVLA's 25A form looks like, this was the original that they used to fill in before they got tablets, but the questions and things are still very much the same as this form. Now, what are your resources? You've now failed your test. My question is, you've just failed the test. What are going to be the main resources you are going to use to determine what to do to pass the test? So the first one is, yes, you look at your previous results from your driving test. That is one of your resources. And the other one would be to do a couple of mock tests with your driving instructor, isn't it? Because that would be a resource as well, the results from a mock test. So the driving instructor can see whether you repeat the problem or if there are other things that were not in the test itself, okay? That's your second resource. All right, guys, so the two resources we are talking about, the first resource is obviously your sheet or your report, which is going to come to either us as the driving school or to yourself, depending on the email that the DVSA hold at that stage. If you haven't passed, it's better to send it to us and to leave it with us so that we can follow up and that we can get it to your driving instructor as well. So the resource, that's your one resource. But guys, it's not the end all and be all of why you failed, because in the test you might have done a parallel park, and the next time you do the test you have to do a pull-up on the right, and the driving examiner is not going to be reporting on something you haven't done in the test. You might have only got one mini roundabout in the test and there was nobody there, so he couldn't evaluate whether you knew how to do mini roundabouts or not. It's not his job to give you a complete list of all the mistakes you've made, and sometimes that's the problem, that you go there and then in the one test he picks up, oh, you're not checking your mirrors enough and you don't know how to deal with mini roundabouts. Now you practice that and you've got it all right, and then you fail because you can't do a parallel park. You need to have the whole thing put together. Your driving instructor must be doing mock tests with you and making sure that you've got the whole thing put together. Those are your two resources, but don't rely just on what the examiner says. It's really, really important to realize that you can't go to the test and then come out of the test. And I've had this before as well. I have had somebody who came to me with 5 fails. 5 fails as well. I had 5 failures. I pulled them over and I said, this is your mistake. Their mistake was showing up inconsistently in the different maneuvers, in the different situations. But it was exactly the same mistake, but it's being read differently in the different tests. And that's what you've got to be looking at for. What is the root cause of the mistake? If you can get to the root cause of the mistake, it's much easier to correct it. But that's not the examiner's job. He's got those little boxes that you're looking at there. That's what he's ticking. That's it. And if something happens outside those boxes, which is the root cause, he's only going to give you the final result. And the typical thing that I keep telling people is this: identify the places where you're going to. That's what's really important. Okay, all right, so serious versus minor faults. Obviously, this is one of those things. With how many minor faults can you still pass the test? It's 15. That's right. So you can have up to 15 minor faults, and then if you get one more, you fail the test. Now, 2 other fault categories that they work on in the test itself. Okay, now if you look at the sheet that we've got up here, you can see there is a block on the left hand side. I'm showing this. Let me do this. I'll draw on the thing. There's this block on the left hand side where they fill in the minors. What are these other 2 here? What do these 2 stand for? These other 2 on this side here. What do those 2 stand for there? Who can tell me what those stand for? It's an S and a D, just so that those who cannot see. It's an S and a D. What does the S and the D stand for? Serious and dangerous. Well done, guys. Yeah, serious and dangerous faults. So how many serious or how many dangerous faults can you have on your driving test? So we've established you can have 15 minor faults. So how many serious or dangerous faults can you have on your driving test? Are you allowed to have that? You can't. You have either a serious or a dangerous fault. You can't pass your test, guys. This is not allowed. Serious or dangerous, not allowed. Okay, now what fault? And if you've attended my previous webinars, you will know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, you might struggle a bit. What fault lies between a serious and a minor? You're not marked on it. You will eventually get marked on it, but what fault category lies between a serious and a minor? Yes, it is a judgment call, guys. There is a thing called a judgment call, and I have seen the examiners do this. So you're sitting in the car with the examiner, and the client makes a fault, which is basically a judgment call. The examiner can either mark it as a minor or as a serious fault. Now he's holding over that fault in his judgment call category because he wants to see the rest of your drive. Now the rest of your drive is really good and nothing else happens, which means it was marginally serious, but he wouldn't just mark it as a serious. So that becomes a judgment call, and it's a judgment call. So he now holds that over and then decides what to do with it at the end of the drive. If he's already got you on one serious, that judgment call will also become a serious. Or if he's got you on a dangerous, he will categorize that judgment call into a serious fault. But if you don't make any more faults, that judgment call, invariably he'll give it to you as a minor, and then you'll pass your test. So you've got to be careful. You don't want to be doing the judgment calls. You've got to watch out for the judgment calls. Okay, and it is the one we haven't mentioned. The thing, we've got to recognize patterns. Patterns, when you go to a driving test, there are certain patterns that will tell you where you are in your actual driving. And one of the things that really does tell you whether you are close to failing or not is how many minor mirror errors you make. Because mirror errors shouldn't be done unless you haven't practiced that in properly and don't realize the process of what the mirror is for. That's normally where the fault lies. Okay, and then circle the cause in the box content method. That is just, you're just going back to the sheets and you're using the proper process there. So what I've done here, the different fault categories are minor faults. Those are marked on your sheet. The judgment call, it can be decided in the test or after the test. So let me give you an example of a judgment call. So you're coming up to a traffic light and there's a slight gradient and you're in a manual car, and then you go through the traffic light and you drive off and you go through the traffic light. Now, because there were no cars behind you, the examiner can let that go as a minor fault. If there had been a car behind you, then he will probably make it into a serious fault. But he can call that fault back at the end of the drive because you made another fault. You didn't react properly to somebody in the mini roundabout. But he wants to get you on at least 2 serious or a dangerous and a serious, or 2 serious faults. He always wants 2 faults in that serious and dangerous category put together, because that is easier for him to explain. If he comes back with a clean sheet and 1 serious fault, that's difficult for him. So he's going to try and always get that to 2. Okay, so be careful of that judgment call. Do not make the judgment calls. And that when you do mount the pavement, he can decide that isn't a serious fault. But I have seen them pull that flippant mounting of the pavement into a serious fault. And it will depend on how much you go over the pavement and if it is a complete misunderstanding when you turn left on a corner. Okay, and then you have serious faults and dangerous faults, and you can't have those. So you can have up to 15 minor faults. You have what they call the judgment call, and then it will depend which way that goes. And then you have the serious fault and the dangerous fault. And these 3 are all marked. Minor, serious, and dangerous are marked faults, and the judgment call is a decided one. Okay, now why the test result isn't the full picture. We have touched on this and I've spoken about it. Guys, don't rely on your next test purely on your test result. Don't think I'm going to take this. This is going to be my resource. I'm going to use this and I'm going to fix these because everything else was fine. No, it wasn't. Invariably, the examiner is not, his job is not to mark you 25 minor faults, 3 serious faults, and all the rest. Once he's got that sheet where you've not passed the test, he doesn't have to justify his position any further, and he will not mark those excess faults because it might discourage you, or it might feel like you're being victimized. He doesn't go there. He's done his job. That's it. It's over. He doesn't need to do it. He can relax. Once he's got those boxes ticked under serious and dangerous, that's it. That's the end of the test for him. He doesn't have to worry about the rest. He might give you some feedback, might not. It depends on him. He's under no obligation whatsoever. His only obligation is to evaluate you and explain to you and your instructor, and you should have your instructor present. He's going to ask you if you can have your instructor present, but it's a good idea that your instructor also hears what the faults were. The examiner's role is to assess, not to teach. He's not going to be talking about all the issues, and get back with your instructor, and your only job then is to make sure that everything else that you have to do becomes natural. It's not something you have to think about. It's natural process. Okay.